Thebe, our series, as you know, and you helped me create the whole rebrand when we went through that 3 years ago from the Gina Din Corporate Communications to the Gina Din Group. And I remember at our event, we gave everybody a talking stick because we think it's so important for Africans to tell the African story. But how do we, how do we change that narrative that comes from the West, the Western media, the child with a distended belly, the famine, the conflict? How do we change that so that we're celebrating Africa more?
Right here in Kenya, if you look at somebody like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who decided that although he's a professor in English or understands English and is taught in English, he decided that I'm going to start speaking and writing only in Kiswahili. And then you look at the East Africa region, 13 countries who said, we have now decided strategically as a region that because Kiswahili is the most populous language around here, it is now our official language. So it begins by accepting and asserting who you are. So most of us, we fail to tell our story because our story embarrasses us. Because we're embarrassed to speak Kiswahili, but we want to speak French with a perfect French accent and English with a perfect English accent, but we do not know our own mother tongues well. If you do not speak your mother tongue well, you will not be able to tell your story well.
So you've got to embrace your own story first.
Embrace your own story first. Where you come from. Most people just happy to tell you I'm from Nairobi, but they'll never tell you that I'm from Nakuru or from another rural area, part of Kenya, because that embarrasses them. It's easier for them to say, oh, I'm from Nairobi, because
that's cooler.
Because they don't understand that from where they come from, the Nyeris and all those, that's actually what made them who they are, and that's part of what gives them the richness of their identity and their distinction in the world. Because as an African, the only thing you can distinguish yourself from in the rest of the world is being an African. So it starts by accepting who you are as an African, and it starts by accepting your culture, it starts your ways of life, and being proud. That's the second important thing, to celebrate them and to practice them wherever you are, and never ever feeling that they're secondary. Do you know, if you go to France, they will speak to you in French.
Oh yeah.
But if the French come to Africa, we want to speak to them in French. This is not France. This is not England. This is Arab Africa, and this is Kenya.
Proudly African.
We should respond to them in Kenya in Kiswahili, and they must go get their books and their translations.
Just like we have to when we go to France,
and try and respond to us the way we do. That's the beginning of us telling our own story. Because when you tell people who your name is, they say to me, what's your name? I said, Thebe Ikalafeng is my full name. They're like, oh, what does that mean? I said, the shield has arrived. They're like, how did your parents arrive at that name? I said, well, I was the first grandchild, the first boy, and I think they looked at it as this is the one who is going to protect and to carry the name.
And you've definitely done that.
Wow. So there's a story to who we are. So and that helps you tell your story better.
But don't you think like the young African is really going away from that though? Because we're just so wanting to be, we're sort of Western culture, we're watching Western stuff on TV all the time. We're on Instagram following all these, Western celebs. So we want to be like them. We want to be the Beyoncés, and we want to be...
Well, technology has been good for us, and it's been terribly bad for us. It's been good for us that we can now be American without leaving our borders, because it's obliterated all the borders. So it's been good in that way, that we can access the rest of the world. Where it's been bad is that now all of a sudden we've assimilated.
Exactly.
Instead of asserting ourselves, instead of celebrating, instead of sharing who we are. Because with the borders now being broken down, we now need to take who we are to these other places. Instead, what we've done is we've taken those places and made them who we are. So yes, the young people, they're challenged. But having said all that, though, it's a balance, because they are the ones who are creating all these made in Africa ideas that we see now. They're the ones who are making the made in Kenya, made in South Africa, made in Africa concepts. They're the ones who are opening websites where they are now exporting these ideas. They're the ones who are living in London and are selling products, like Moby, your beautiful.
Oh, I love her stuff.
know, and you love that stuff. And she's based in London, but she's a Kenyan.
Yeah, and she's proudly Kenyan.
And she's proudly
Yeah.
Kenyan. So in many ways, technology has been bad for us, but it's been good for us for that reason. So it is, I think it's a balance. I think it's actually a responsibility that we have, all of us, the older ones, to constantly insist and to guide and to nurture. And to me, always starts, I say to my friends who've got children, is why do you speak English to your children? Especially the ones who speak, if your African language is your first language, you speak to me, and then when you switch your child, you speak in English. So I said, I don't get this. Why am I inferior enough to speak to in the local language, but your child is superior? They're like, oh no, but they speak English at school. I said, well, we're not at school. We are at home now. Can they speak the home language?
But it's just embracing our Africanness.
Correct, because by doing that, they will grow up to respect and to be proud of where they come from. But if you constantly tell them, bad language.
Yeah, it's not cool to speak your language. If people think that, then obviously they're not going to learn.
They're not, and if I think it's Nelson Mandela who said, if you speak to the man or the woman in their language, it goes straight to their hearts. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot get to people's hearts, you cannot get to their hands, to their feet, to their minds, and all those. Because when you love where you are, when you love where you come from, it shows in everything.
It really does.
And we spoke earlier about the quality, about the products, about the services, about the books, about everything else. It will show who you are based on where you come from.
Well, you know what, Thebe, I love the fact that you mentor so many, and I've met so many people in South Africa who really look up to you as their mentor, and they're living that African story. They're telling their African stories, and they're proudly African. And so I think that's just so awesome. And I know that the people that are watching this program are going to learn so much about really embracing who we are, loving the fact that we are Africans. I love it when I travel and people always look at me and say, where are you from? Because no one can quite figure that out.
Correct.
They say, I'm African, and they're like, but where are you really from? And I'm saying, I'm really from Africa. But where are you from originally? I mean, it's always this point. I'm like, I'm African.
Because they don't understand that Africa is not. We're not the one look in Africa.
Exactly.
We are,
the
because
diversity.
They expect us all to be dark. Big bellies with little patches of leather and no shoes, running around and speaking Kunta Kinte, and all coming from one big hole in Africa. So they get very confused when they meet us, that some of us are dark, some of us are light complexions, some of us have got nappy hairs, some of us have got straight hair, and but they don't understand that Africa is a melting pot.
It is.
And it is what Kwame Nkrumah again said, is that I'm an African, not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me.
I love that.
So we are African because of the way we've been raised and we've been nurtured, and that Africa is very diverse. It's 55 countries, all at different levels of development, all very distinctly, uniquely, and beautiful. And people like to say to me, which is your favorite African country? I said, all of them.
It's Kenya, right?
Yeah. I should say Kenya, right? But I always say to them, it's all of them. Because every single one you get to has got its
own charm.
Everyone you get to has got its own challenge. No challenge, it's charm. Its own charm. So, and its challenges, you can say. And so you cannot put anyone above another.
Yeah, no, you can't.
And it's what I said earlier, I said, as Africans, we need to find what is distinctive about each and every one of our country, and that's what we must celebrate.
And I think the one thing that we Africans have that we're so fortunate is that we get to call Africa home, right? I mean, people call it Africa, and we get to call it home. I think that is. I mean, how lucky are we?
And everybody wants to come here.
Oh, everybody does.
Everybody wants to come here, whether it's to visit or whether it's to move here, because we've got great nature and we've got great people.
Yeah.
And they come here for that. Because when you ever talk about other countries, the things that you talk about them, you talk about the things they have.
It's so
and
true.
With us, we talk about who we have and who we are.
I love it when I travel and you say from Africa and they say, oh, I've always wanted to visit there. And I'm like, oh, that's what I call home. It's just it's such a great feeling.
And when we go to their places, we're like, I just want to climb onto the Eiffel Tower and come down.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, if the storm knocks out Eiffel Tower, knocks out Statue of Liberty, there's nothing else left.
What else is left?
We will be here standing.
Absolutely. Thebe, just as we close, I just wanted to just touch on a brand that I feel so strongly about. I know you do too. NBA Africa. And I know you and I were at the game, not this year, 2 years ago, and we had just such a great time. But the NBA African players and what they do for this continent, isn't it just amazing? Don't you just love their passion?
Well, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day that diaspora Africans, which these are many ways, you know, Africans in other parts of the world, and the one thing they have a passion for, or the one thing they do different from us, is they don't look at Africa as the different countries they come from.
No.
They look at Africa as a collective ownership that says, I am African. And what the NBA has done with what the NBA has done with this is enable them, giving them a platform to come back home and share with the rest of us who don't get to go to those games, to travel to the world, the passion they have first for the continent and the excellence they've achieved in the world. So I really think it's an excellent idea, the NBA Africa, to bring it into Africa. They must move around, you know.
I know they're hoping.
It mustn't just a camp in Kenya and a game in South Africa.
No,
they must move around.
The junior league now is in 11 countries on the continent. So you know they're definitely moving through that. But I always get proud to, and you know, I know Amadou and you know each other really well, but he's such an amazing, inspirational guy. I love him.
And Amadou had all the choices to stay in America.
I mean,
all of them. I mean, every single one of those athletes, they have no reason to come back here because they've got lots of money.
Exactly.
They can get citizenship anywhere in those countries if they want. The fact that they come back home means a lot about them as individuals.
It's the character, isn't it?
The character of the
character, and you know how they teach the young kids life skills. It's not. It
Correct.
goes beyond the game.
Correct.
It's about the life skills that they've given them. I mean, I know what an impact NBA have had on my own son, on Nathan. Yes. You know, he spent a lot of time with them.
But I mean, what Nathan has done is done something that everybody else should do. He saw the opportunity and he immersed himself in it. And during the times when they're here, he immerses himself in the game. He works with them. He plays with them. He hangs with them. He's learning a few things out of that. One, he's learning the value of hard work. But most important, he's learning competitiveness. Because what those NBA players are bringing to Africa, they are saying, if you apply yourself, you can reach these heights.
Exactly.
But they're also saying that, and because it's a competition, they say you also understand that if you train hard and you compete hard and you win, it tells a good story of a winning Africa. We need to tell a story of a winning Africa.
And grit. You know, I think that's the thing. I think grit. I think what I can see it's taught Nathan is actually pure grit. That you've got to keep. You've got to keep at it. You don't give up. It's resilience.
It's resilience.
It really is.
Now, you can't take away what Amadou has done in the NBA by bringing the NBA to Africa. It's brought back that sense of responsibility as well to the continent. Because, all of us as we travel, we must remember we always take Africa with us. Because as Africans, the one thing that's quite interesting is you can fit only in Africa.
That's true.
Whereas people look at you and say, you're African, right? And you may never have ever been to the continent, but you are African.
You are African.